I am Elijah Vance, 35 years old, and for a decade, I have been both the invisible backbone and the silent secret of the Vance family. To the world, we are a respected Atlanta dynasty, known for our luxury hotels, glitzy social events, and a family name that carries weight. To my mother, Denise, and my older brother, Marcus, I am a failure, a shadow, an embarrassment, the scapegoat in their carefully curated story of wealth and influence. And yet, ironically, I am the only reason our empire exists, the only reason the Vance name still commands attention across continents, the only reason anyone outside of our city knows the word Vance is synonymous with luxury. 10 years ago, my father's small, struggling hotel business was nothing more than a faint dream. Today, it stretches from Atlanta to London, with a growing empire in Dubai, Tokyo, and Paris. And yet, every dinner, every public event, every whispered conversation in our city paints me as incompetent. Yesterday, that delicate balance of humiliation and hidden power collapsed. The call came from my brother's wedding planner. My invitation to Marcus's wedding had been officially revoked. My $100,000 deposit, money I had invested to secure the venue and catering, was now claimed as a gift to the family. I leaned back in my chair in my penthouse office, the Atlanta skyline sprawling like a living map beneath me, sunlight bouncing off glass towers and the shimmering river beyond. I felt nothing. Not anger, not surprise, just cold, precise calculation. I already knew how my mother and brother operated. They thrived on public perception, on humiliation, on pretending to care about appearances while quietly devouring everything I built. The private line rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. My assistant patched it through. The caller ID blinked. Chloe, Royal Weddings. I knew immediately. Marcus's wedding, 3 weeks away. Mr. Vance? A hesitant voice said. This is Chloe. I'm the planner for your brother's wedding at the Vance Majestic. Go ahead, I said, swiveling in my chair to face the city. Calm, detached. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for a decade, though I didn't realize it at the time. My family had spent years sharpening the knives. I had spent years forging the shield. She faltered. Sir, I have to make a difficult call. Your mother, Mrs. Denise Vance, just instructed me to officially cancel your invitation to the wedding. I let the words hang. The city moved beneath me, unaware of the storm unfolding in my office. A hawk circled the building far below, and I watched it, feeling an uncanny kinship with its effortless dominance of the skies. I understand, I said, calm as a winter morning, devoid of any tremor. There was a pause, then a rush of words. Sir, that's not even the worst part. She instructed me to keep the $100,000 deposit you paid for the venue and catering. She said it was a gift to the family and should now be managed by your brother Marcus for all remaining expenses. A laugh threatened to escape, but I swallowed it. Of course, this was the pattern. Erase Elijah, humiliate him, then use his money to celebrate his exclusion. That was my family. I can't legally do that without your written consent, Chloe continued, her voice trembling. But she's threatening to ruin my business if I don't comply. She said you're unreliable, that she's taking over. I leaned forward, letting the icy calm of my presence seep into the phone. Chloe, I said, voice low and steady. You are the planner for the Vance Hayes wedding, correct? At the Vance Majestic Hotel? Yes, sir, she said, her professional veneer cracking. Good. Now I want you to open your email. I'm sending you my actual contact information. You are no longer speaking to Elijah Vance, the black sheep. You are speaking to E.V., the sole owner of the Vance Majestic Hotel, Royal Catering, and the Beacon Hotel chain. I let the silence stretch. Her hesitation was delicious in its subtlety. "And the deposit?" she asked finally, voice smaller. "The $100,000 I paid?" "You will cancel the entire wedding," I said, letting my words strike like steel. There was a sharp intake of breath. "Sir, I can't. You're not the groom or the bride." "No, I am not. But I am the owner of the Vance Majestic. I am the CEO of Royal Catering. I am the one who holds every reservation your guests have booked across my hotel chain. Cancel them all, immediately. And send my mother and brother the full cancellation bill. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir. Perfectly clear," she stammered. I hung up. My reflection stared back at me from the window. Hard eyes, tight jaw. The quiet aura of authority I had earned over years of patience, precision, and work, no one acknowledged. I turned to the single photograph on my desk. Me, 10 years younger, arm around my father, David Vance, standing atop our first Atlanta flagship hotel. He had looked so proud, so certain in my ability to carry the family legacy forward. The memory of the will reading struck next, unbidden. The tension had been suffocating in that small law office. My mother, dressed in black, had looked more annoyed than heartbroken. Marcus had acted impatient, as if the reading were a mere formality before his coronation. And me? I had left with a deep, cold understanding that my family would never truly recognize my worth. Yet here I was, quietly orchestrating their downfall while maintaining a veneer of composure. The audacity of their betrayal was almost admirable. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted to use my money to celebrate my exclusion. That audacity, that underestimation, was their fatal flaw. I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Atlanta stretched below me, glittering, like a living jewel, unaware of the drama perched high above. My empire was vast, my family was blinded by greed, and in that moment, I understood one immutable truth. I was the only one capable of playing this game at a level they could never comprehend. The Vance family had underestimated Elijah Vance for the last time, and this was only the beginning. The morning sunlight poured into my penthouse office, glinting off the sleek glass desk that had been the command center of my empire for years. I took a slow sip of black coffee, letting its bitter warmth anchor me. Outside, Atlanta moved at its usual frantic pace, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. Marcus, my older brother, had always believed that wealth and success were inherited traits, something that could be flaunted without effort. He had never understood that empire building required strategy, patience, and grit. That same ignorance had guided him to believe that canceling my wedding invitation, attempting to seize my deposit, and publicly erasing me from his perfect day was clever. He was wrong. I picked up the secure line and dialed Chloe once more. I knew exactly how to frame my words so she would understand that she was speaking to someone with authority, not just the humiliated son. "Chloe," I said, calm but firm. "This is Evie. I assume you've received my previous email with my contact information?" Her voice quivered, almost inaudible. "Yes, Mr. Vance. Evie, I have it open, but I—" "Good," I interrupted. "Now, I want to clarify a few points. You are the planner for the Vance Hayes wedding at the Vance Majestic, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And the venue, the catering, the hotel reservations, all of them are under my ownership?" "Yes." She hesitated. "But my instructions. Your mother—" "I am well aware of my mother's instructions," I said, letting the words land like steel. "But instructions are irrelevant when they conflict with ownership. You will proceed according to my authority, cancel every booking, every reservation, and every catering order. Send the total cancellation bill to my mother and brother immediately." There was silence, then a choked, I can't." "Yes, you can," I replied, my voice calm as ice. You just need to do it. I hung up and reclined in my chair, letting the cold satisfaction wash over me. Chloe would comply. She had no choice. She wasn't dealing with a powerless family member anymore. She was dealing with EV, the CEO who could single-handedly erase their entire social spectacle with a few clicks. This was the game my family had been playing for a decade. Humiliation through invisibility. They thrived on the public perception that I was incapable, unreliable, and weak. But I had built my empire precisely, so moments like this would be mine to command. I poured another cup of coffee and opened my laptop, London. Expansion drafts awaited my review, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about the guests, Marcus's fiancé, and my mother's calculated smile when she instructed Chloe to seize my deposit. Becca Hayes, the ambitious fiancé, had orchestrated this entire humiliation campaign. I had met her once at a charity gala, and she had already made it clear she saw me as an obstacle. My mother was complicit, a co-conspirator in the silent war they waged against me. And Marcus? Marcus didn't even know the rules. He was merely playing the role they had assigned him, the heir apparent, unaware that the board, the banks, the hotels, and the luxury catering contracts were mine to command. A message pinged on my private corporate chat. It was from my assistant, Lila. Lila. Sir, Chloe just confirmed receipt of your instructions. She is panicking but compliant. The cancellation notices are being drafted. Guests are starting to be notified. I allowed a thin smile. This was the moment the power imbalance became visible. My family believed they could manipulate me, but the reality was far more precise. I owned the stage, the actors, and the script. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling city below. The streets of Atlanta had no idea that their social elite were about to experience a humiliation curated by the very man they had mocked for years. I had played the long game. Every late-night meeting, every acquisition, every risky investment, everything had led to this moment. A sudden thought made me smirk. Marcus had been bragging for months about his perfect wedding. Becca had boasted to our social circle that the Vance Majestic, my family's flagship venue, would host a flawless, Instagram-worthy celebration. They didn't realize that perfection required my cooperation, and I had just withdrawn it entirely. I pored over the financial statements of the Vance Majestic. The deposits, the catering costs, the hotel room reservations, all under my control. The power was intoxicating. This wasn't just about money. This was about principle. They had underestimated me for years. They had laughed at my supposed failures, dismissed my achievements, and plotted to publicly humiliate me at their own celebration. Now they would see the truth. The phone rang again. This time it was a call from the senior events manager at the Vance Majestic. "Sir, the cancellations?" he stammered. "Yes. Send them out immediately. Notify the catering staff. Reassign the rooms. Ensure that every reservation is canceled and that the invoices are sent directly to Mrs. Denise Vance and Marcus Vance," I instructed. "But the guests?" "They are not your concern," I replied. "This is a matter of corporate authority. Execute it." By the time I hung up, the process was already in motion. Hundreds of guests, carefully curated by my brother and his fiancée, would soon receive notices that their weekend plans were canceled. Social media would buzz with confusion. Invitations would be revoked, rooms unbooked, and caterers left without instructions. I poured another cup of coffee, savoring the bitter taste. My mother would call, my brother would call, and they would finally understand what I had known all along. I was not the family failure. I was the engine of the Vance empire, the unseen force that held their lives together. Then came the final step, a message to Becca Hayes herself. She had tried to manipulate my family against me, orchestrating their plans to isolate me. I drafted a concise, cold note. EV to Becca Hayes. You assumed I was irrelevant. You assumed I was powerless. You were wrong. Effective immediately, Your wedding will not proceed at the Vance Majestic or any of my associated properties. Consider this your first lesson in underestimating me." I hit send and leaned back, letting the calm certainty of my actions settle over me. The chessboard had been set, and I had just moved the queen into position. As the city lights began to fade with the setting sun, I realized that my family had underestimated the most critical element of all: patience. They had thought that humiliation would weaken me. In reality, it had sharpened me. The black sheep of the Vance family was no longer an outcast. He was a force that commanded attention, fear, and respect. And this was only the beginning. The city lights of Atlanta shimmered like scattered jewels beneath my penthouse window, but my thoughts were elsewhere, rooted in the past, in memories that had shaped every careful, calculated decision I had ever made. The Vance legacy was a house built on ambition, grit, and yes, betrayal. But only one of us had truly understood what it took to carry it forward. I walked to my desk and picked up a framed photograph I had kept for over a decade. Me, 10 years younger, standing atop our first Atlanta flagship hotel with my father, David Vance. His arm draped over my shoulder. His eyes were full of pride, his smile steady and wide, the kind of expression that only comes from seeing someone you truly believe in. I remembered that day, the day he handed me the keys to our first successful hotel, the night he explained to me the blueprint of the empire he had always dreamed of building. My father saw me not just as his son, but as his successor, the one person who could elevate the Vance name to a global standard. And yet, by the time he passed, my mother and Marcus had already begun reshaping the narrative. In the reading of my father's will, I had been systematically reduced to a shadow, stripped of recognition, my achievements minimized, my inheritance trivialized. The memory was suffocating, almost physically. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had been precise, almost surgical, in how he read each clause. Small bequests were enumerated first, household items, minor financial allocations, each one a reminder that my mother and brother would control the narrative of my father's empire while I remained at the periphery. Denise had sat in the front row, dressed in black, her expression one of irritation more than grief. Marcus had checked his watch every 5 minutes, acting as though the reading were a ceremonial inconvenience before his inevitable coronation. And me? I had been calm, almost invisible, as if erasure were a skill I had perfected over the years. I remembered the first few months after the will reading. I tried to explain the business intricacies to my mother. I tried to convince Marcus to take the hotel expansions seriously, but both had little interest in the empire itself. They were concerned only with appearances. They wanted the title of Vance heir without any of the responsibility. So, I built. Quietly, methodically. Every risk I took, every acquisition, every investment, every hotel expansion, was done with one eye on the future and the other on the inevitable betrayals. By the time they realized the scale of what I had accomplished, it was too late. My mother's disapproval and Marcus's envy could not undo a decade of work. I poured a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the fading sunlight, and let it burn down my throat. The taste was familiar, a small comfort in the chaos of my thoughts. 3 weeks away, Marcus's wedding would have been the perfect display of their triumph. Becca Hayes had orchestrated everything with precision, ensuring that I remained invisible, that my contributions were erased from the public eye, and that my money funded their perfect fantasy. That arrogance was staggering. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I thought about Chloe, the wedding planner, panicking on the phone earlier. The fear in her voice wasn't just compliance, it was recognition. She understood, in some small way, the shift in power that had occurred. I was no longer a background character in my own life. I was the author of every chapter going forward. I opened the files on my laptop, reviewing the reservations at Vance Majestic and across the Beacon chain. Each booking was a thread, a single domino. And when those dominoes fell, They wouldn't just affect Marcus and Becca, they would ripple through their social circle, leaving a mess that would be remembered. The audacity of revenge, calculated to perfection, was a small thrill I allowed myself to enjoy. But this chapter of the story was not just about vengeance. It was about reflection, about understanding why the Vance Empire existed, why I had spent 10 years building it in silence while the world, including my own family, mocked my so-called failures. I thought about my first hotel acquisition in London, the skepticism I faced from local investors, the late nights negotiating contracts, the moments I had to swallow pride and admit that sometimes power required patience over pride. That experience had taught me something fundamental. Those who belittle others rarely recognize the quiet strength that enables one to rise above. And my family had been experts at belittling me. From childhood, my successes were minimized. My failures were amplified. If I won an award, it was luck. If I generated profits, it was temporary. If I suggested expansion, I was overreaching. Every slight, every sarcastic comment, every casual dismissal had fueled a fire I kept carefully contained until now. A knock at the door drew me from my reverie. Lila, my assistant, entered with a folder thick with printed cancellation notices and email confirmations. "Sir, all notifications have gone out," she said quietly. "Guests, vendors, catering, all accounted for. The bills are ready to be sent to your mother and brother." I took the folder, flipping through each document with calm precision. Names, dates, times, charges, hundreds of entries, meticulously detailed. "Good," I said. "Ensure that any attempt to bypass the cancellations is met with immediate escalation. I want nothing left to chance." "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady but respectful. She had worked with me long enough to understand the difference between fear and authority, and she knew I commanded both. I set the folder down and looked again at the photograph of my father. His faith in me had been absolute. He had understood that empire building was not about public approval, nor about social appearances. It was about vision, control, and the ability to act decisively when others hesitated. And now, a decade later, I was living that lesson. Every phone call, every canceled reservation, every bewildered socialite and flustered planner was a testament to what patience, intelligence, and strategic thinking could achieve. I remembered the conversations with Marcus during our teenage years, how he had laughed when I expressed interest in managing the hotel finances, how he had called me names in front of friends, pretending that my ambition was childish. I had remained silent then, learning, observing, and quietly preparing. Now, the tables had turned. The power imbalance that had dominated our family for decades had shifted. They would learn what it meant to underestimate me. And not just Marcus or Becca, but my mother too. Denise had spent years pretending that she knew better, that I was incompetent, that I was irrelevant. She had forgotten one vital detail. I was not just Elijah Vance. I was Evie. I was the owner, the CEO, the architect of every success she tried to claim as her own. As night fell over Atlanta, I poured another glass of scotch and sat by the window, letting the city's glow mirror the quiet storm within me. The empire I had built was mine. The power I wielded was undeniable. And the family that had scorned me for so long was finally about to face the consequences of their arrogance. I took a deep breath. This was no longer about revenge. It was about legacy. My father's vision, my decade of work, and the relentless drive that had defined my adult life were all converging on a single truth. The Vance family had underestimated Elijah Vance, and they would never make that mistake again. The morning air in Atlanta was crisp, but inside my penthouse, the atmosphere was thick with quiet anticipation. I sat behind my desk, a glass of scotch in hand, and watched the city wake below. My phone vibrated, a message from Chloe, the wedding planner. She had executed my instructions perfectly. Every reservation canceled, every catering order voided, and invoices sent directly to my mother and brother. The audacity of it was almost intoxicating. My mother, Denise, and my brother Marcus had spent years plotting behind my back, orchestrating social humiliation and attempting to seize what was mine. And now, the first domino had fallen. Chloe's text was terse. All notifications sent, cancellations confirmed, they're in shock. I smiled thinly. Shock was only the beginning. They hadn't yet comprehended the full scope of their miscalculation. I thought about Becca Hayes, Marcus's ambitious fiancée. She had been the architect of their plan, manipulating my mother, whispering in Marcus's ear, and ensuring I remained the invisible obstacle to their perfect wedding. I had underestimated her cunning initially, but her confidence had become her vulnerability. She had assumed I was irrelevant, powerless. She had assumed I would quietly accept my exclusion. She had made a critical mistake, underestimating Evie. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, and allowed myself a moment to savor the culmination of years of patient observation. Every insult, every slight, every dismissal from my mother or brother had been a lesson in strategy. And now, strategy was paying dividends. My thoughts drifted to Denise. My mother had always been a master of public perception. To the Atlanta elite, she was the matriarch, the elegant figure who commanded respect. Behind closed doors, she had wielded control through guilt, manipulation, and selective favoritism. I had lived under her scrutiny for decades, learning every nuance, every weak spot, every silent lever she used to control the family narrative. Now, those levers were mine. The phone rang, jolting me from my reverie. It was Denise. "Elijah," she began, her voice carefully measured, trying to sound calm. I don't understand. What's happened? The invitations, the reservations, they're canceled. Marcus, he's panicked, I know," I interrupted smoothly, letting the truth sink in. "Chloe sent you the invoices. Every booking, every catering order, every reservation. Canceled. You and Marcus are fully responsible for the financial implications." There was a pause on the line, a silence that carried the weight of disbelief. Denise's carefully cultivated composure faltered. "Elijah, this isn't... You can't..." "Oh, I can," I said, letting the words hang like a guillotine. "I've been watching, waiting, and building. I own the hotels, I own the catering, I own the contracts, and now you are merely guests in a house that belongs to me." She hesitated. You wouldn't..." "I just did," I said, my tone flat, precise. "And I will continue to do so whenever necessary. This isn't about anger or revenge, Mother. This is about principle. You attempted to erase me. You attempted to seize my resources. You attempted to manipulate my family's image for personal gain. That is unacceptable. That ends today." The line went silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, trying to calculate her next move, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The narrative had shifted. The black sheep was no longer invisible. I hung up, letting the cold satisfaction settle. Then I turned my attention to Marcus. His entitlement had always been his greatest flaw. He believed that success came without effort, that prestige was inherited, and that family loyalty was an unquestionable shield. But he had not anticipated my precision. I drafted a short, businesslike email to Marcus Vance. "All bookings at Vance Majestic and affiliated properties for your wedding have been canceled. Invoices are attached. Responsibility lies with you and Becca Hayes. Enjoy recalculating your guest list and accommodations. EV." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Every word was deliberate, every phrase designed to assert authority, while stripping them of the assumption of control they had taken for granted. Then came the final phase, observing the social ripple effect. I scrolled through early notifications. The panic among the guests, the whispered conversations, the frantic calls to hotels and catering staff. Becca's name appeared repeatedly in these threads, her signature attached to instructions that had been rendered void by my intervention. She had underestimated the black sheep. She had assumed invisibility. I poured another scotch and walked to the window, surveying the city that was my dominion. The Vance Empire was more than wealth. It was influence, control, and precision. My family had been given a glimpse of what happens when these elements are wielded correctly. I thought of my father again. He had believed in me, trusted me, and equipped me with the tools to create something enduring. Denise and Marcus had attempted to undermine that trust, to twist legacy into social theater, but they had miscalculated. My father had taught me to value patience and vision over impulse and ego. And today, those lessons bore fruit. Chloe's next text arrived. They've called repeatedly. Marcus is begging. Becca is panicking. Denise, I don't think she can process it. I smiled, a small, private smile, savoring the satisfaction of decades-long patience finally meeting opportunity. But the day was far from over. My family would respond, try to counteract, attempt to regain the illusion of control, and I would be ready. Every move they made would be anticipated. Every bluff they played would be countered. Because this wasn't just about a canceled wedding. This was about a principle they had violated for decades, that success and power are not inherited. They are earned, wielded, and when necessary, defended. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. I poured one final glass of scotch and watched Atlanta glow. My family had underestimated Elijah Vance. The consequences were now visible, undeniable, and irreversible. And this was only the beginning. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Atlanta penthouse, glinting off the polished steel and glass surfaces. The city below moved with the usual rhythm of traffic, commerce, and casual oblivion, completely unaware that the Vance family was in chaos. I sipped my coffee and allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. 3 weeks ago, my brother Marcus had been preparing for the perfect wedding. Becca Hayes, his fiancée, had orchestrated every detail to perfection, or so she thought. Invitations sent, the Vance Majestic fully booked, catering contracted, hotels reserved. They believed they controlled the day, that the black sheep of the family would remain invisible, irrelevant, powerless. They were wrong. I had spent the last decade building an empire, silently, strategically, and meticulously. My mother, Denise, and my brother had underestimated me for the final time. They assumed wealth alone could make me submissive. They assumed my reputation as the family failure meant they could manipulate me, erase me, or take what I had built. And yet, here I was, watching from above as the full consequences of their arrogance unfolded. The phone rang. First Denise, then Marcus, then Becca. Each call began with a practiced veneer of civility and quickly dissolved into frantic, barely contained panic. Elijah, Eve, what have you done? Denise's voice quivered. I simply exercised the authority you assumed I lacked, I replied evenly. All reservations, bookings, and catering orders for the wedding have been canceled. Invoices have been sent directly to you and Marcus. Silence. Then frantic words. You can't do this. This is outrageous. Not outrageous. Correct, I said. You underestimated your brother. You overestimated your control. Next was Marcus. Elijah, this is a disaster. People are calling. Vendors are panicking. Becca, she'll ruin me. I suspect she already is, I said lightly. But do not confuse anger with incompetence. The incompetence here was entirely yours, Marcus. You assumed wealth alone could secure obedience. You were wrong. Becca's call was more insistent, sharper. Evie, This is Becca Hayes. You have no right. This is my wedding. You can't. Ah, but I do, I said, leaning back in my chair. You see, you and your fiancé never understood one simple principle. The empire belongs to the one who built it, controls it, and sustains it. That is not Marcus. That is not you. That is Evie. Her silence said more than words could. I could hear the disbelief, the calculations running in her mind, the frantic realization that the person she assumed powerless was, in fact, omnipotent in this situation. I took a sip of my scotch, letting the warmth anchor me. This wasn't personal. This was principle. This was about correcting a lifetime of underestimation. My mother had tried to manipulate Chloe, attempted to seize my deposit, and orchestrated a public humiliation. Marcus had been complicit through ignorance and entitlement. Becca had been the catalyst, the ambitious outsider who assumed she could rewrite the rules. Now, they were all learning a harsh lesson. Chloe's messages kept arriving, short, panicked updates. All guests notified, every reservation canceled, vendors are scrambling, social media buzz is intense, they are calling nonstop. I allowed a rare, private smile to touch my lips. The black sheep had spoken, and the empire had listened. I stood and walked to the window, the Atlanta skyline stretching endlessly before me. My life had been built on precision, patience, and foresight. My family had squandered opportunities through arrogance, greed, and superficiality. They had forgotten that wealth is meaningless without control. Power is meaningless without vision. And influence is meaningless without respect. They had mocked me for years, told the world I was a failure, a disappointment, a shadow. And now, the world would see the truth. The Vance Empire was mine to command. The Vance Majestic, Royal Catering, and the Beacon Hotel chain, the backbone of the social and financial life of Atlanta, were instruments of my authority. The wedding, once a symbol of their triumph, had been transformed into a mirror reflecting their own folly. My father's legacy had been entrusted to me, and I had honored it. Not with blind sentimentality, but with precision. Not with fleeting emotion, but with enduring strategy. And the fallout was already visible. News of the canceled wedding spread like wildfire through social channels. Guests were left scrambling, socialites whispered about the sudden chaos, and the Atlanta elite began to wonder what had gone wrong. The Vance family's carefully curated image of perfection had crumbled in a single calculated move. I remembered a lesson my father had taught me. True power is not about the moment of victory. It is about creating circumstances so that victory is inevitable. Today, that lesson had been applied with surgical accuracy. By the evening, the calls had slowed. Marcus's panic had given way to stunned silence. Denise was grappling with disbelief, and Becca had vanished from the social scene she had thought she controlled. I poured one final glass of scotch and turned back to the photograph of my father. His eyes shone with pride even from memory. I had carried his vision forward. I had defended the legacy he entrusted to me. And in doing so, I had redefined my place in the family forever. The Vance family had tried to erase me, humiliate me, and steal from me. And yet, through patience, strategy, and unwavering confidence, I had turned their game into a testament of my strength. I, Elijah Vance, the black sheep, was no longer invisible. I was the empire, I was the voice, I was the reckoning, and the Vance family, the world, and Atlanta itself would never forget it.